Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new week and to a new reading lesson. We're going to look today at tall tales, and that might be something that you're familiar with or maybe something that you don't know much about. So, before we start reading our new story for the week, we're going to talk about what a tall tale is. All right. So, you might recognize some of these stories on the front cover. Johnny Appleseed, I know second graders read that. Davy Crockett, you might have read Paul Bunyan before. We're going to read Paul Bunyan today. So hopefully, if you don't know a little bit about the story, you're going to learn, right? Before we start our lesson, though, let's look at our learning target. I can retell stories, including folk tales, to determine the central message. You might have heard that word folk tales before. All right, let's look at our next slide. There are a lot of different types of fiction stories, right? We call those genres. And within fiction, there's lots of different types. So maybe you're thinking, oh, yeah, mystery. I love mystery stories. Or there's science fiction or fantasy, historical fiction, or even realistic fiction, like what we're working on right now in writing. So, do you see one of your favorite genres of reading? Do you kind of gravitate towards certain types of books? Do you like to read fantasy stories that are, unrealistic? There's magic, there's talking animals. Maybe you love mystery stories where it's very suspenseful and there's, something puzzling that's happening that they solve in the end. So maybe you see one of your favorites here, okay? If not, maybe traditional literature is your favorite, okay? Traditional literature has different types of stories kind of in this category, like fairy tales, like myths, or even legends. And you'll see that I have the word folk tales highlighted in pink there. Okay, and what a traditional literature story is a story that's passed down from one group to another over time. So these are types of stories that get shared and passed on. Well, we talked at the very beginning about tall tales, right? And a tale is a story. We find tall tales in that category of folk tales, okay? And what a tall tale is it's a supposedly true story. You notice how I have that in italics, so it's a little bit exaggerated, right? A tall tale is a supposedly true story that has been exaggerated. So they've kind of stretched the truth or they've changed some of the details. And you're kind of like, I don't know if I can believe that or not, right? So we're going to take a peek at what some folk tales or tall tales that you might be familiar with. And then we're going to look at our new story. We're going to think in our story today about a point of view. So here are some features of tall tales. Remember, we've talked about features in writing. What do they include? Things like I said, those exaggerated details. Sometimes the characters have superhuman strength. They can do things that you're like, I don't know if that's really possible or not. They use everyday language, like regular language like we use. There might be some truth in the story, and the problems tend to be solved in a really comical, humorous, fantastical, which is kind of like odd or strange. That's how they get solved in these types of stories, in tall tales. You might recognize some of these famous characters from a tall tale. Like I said, we're going to read Paul Bunyan today. Maybe you've heard of Pecos Bill, or Molly Pitcher, or John Henry, or Davy Crockett, or Johnny Appleseed, right? Most of these characters really did exist, but what they did, their skills, their accomplishments have kind of been exaggerated or embellished or stretched. We like to say tall tales, the truth kind of gets stretched. So let's take one more quick look at tips for reading tall tales. Okay, when you're reading them, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, what of these elements, what really sounds true, and what things are really too good to be true? Okay, you might be reading a tall tale. What parts are funny or humorous, and what is based in history? Okay, so here is the character of John Henry, and they say that he could outperform a steam-powered hammer, right? So he says, I'm John Henry, and I was strong, but could I really outperform a steam-powered hammer? Do you think a person could do that? Probably not. So they're exaggerating the truth, right? He was a strong person. Comparing him, right, to a steam-powered hammer, but that's probably not true, right? It's too good to be true. So what we're going to do now is we're going to read a few pages of Paul Bunyan. And if you've never read it before, that's awesome. Okay, if you have, I want you to be looking at it through a different lens, right? Thinking about how maybe you learned it in a different grade, maybe in second grade you read it. Okay, but what do you see now as a third grader? So let me zoom out. This is 2 pages, so it is a little bit hard to get under one camera lens. And I'm going to move this out of the way so I can get you the most square footage here that you can see. All right, so here's Paul Bunyan. Okay, here's the man. Here's his ox. We'll learn about his ox. You'll notice that the color is quite interesting and unique, right? Have you ever seen an animal like that? Probably not. Okay, so let's listen. Here's a picture of Paul Bunyan. Here are his parents. Okay, notice the illustration. We've talked a lot about illustrations and how they help us understand the story. It says, growing up, Paul Bunyan was always big. When he was born, his first cries broke every window for miles around. And that was only the beginning. His crib was a rowboat with rockers, and his baths flooded the house until his parents gave up and started washing him outside. But Paul wasn't done growing, not by a long shot. It took the wool from a whole flock of sheep just to knit him one sweater. By the time he started school, he wore potato sacks for socks and used wagon wheels to button his shirts. Of course, so much growing made Paul hungry. He ate 40 bowls of porridge, it's like oatmeal, for breakfast. And by the time he was done cleaning up, he was hungry all over again. Okay, now, do you think that a baby would really have a bathtub that's that big, right? Look at how big his parents are. He's much larger. Can somebody eat 40 bowls of oatmeal? Do we really need to wear big potato sacks? That's like if we go to the store and buy, a bunch of potatoes. They're really big bags. Those were what he wore for socks. Sounds a little far-fetched, don't you think? When Paul was 15, the winter was so cold, even the snow turned blue. One morning, Paul found a young ox, half buried in a snowdrift. If that wasn't odd enough, the ox was as blue as the snow itself. Ooh, there's a simile. My poor little babe, he said. And that's how Babe got his name. Paul never found out where Babe came from, but it didn't matter. Paul was just happy to have a new friend. Babe was really strong. In one of their first jobs, Paul hitched him up to a crooked road that needed fixing. Pull, he said, and Babe pulled. The road was pretty stubborn, but so were Paul and Babe. By the time the sun set, they had that road straightened out just fine. Good work, Paul said to Babe, and Babe snorted back. They made a good team. Now, do you think that somebody who is really strong would be able to, we're talking about the ox, would be able to hook something up to the ox, right, and pull and pull and pull until that road straightened out? All that concrete, that seems pretty far-fetched, right? That's very exaggerated, trying to explain how strong he is, right? Babe and Paul Bunyan, right? They make a good team, and they're both really strong and really big, but would they really be able to do that to the concrete highway or road? No, right? Does the snow turn blue because it's so cold? Have we ever seen a blue ox before? No. They're just trying to show us how cold it is, right? Because sometimes we feel like we're turning blue when it's so cold. Okay, so they're exaggerating a lot of details in the story, which is comical and humorous and funny, right? but there's something to learn in the story. So we're going to keep reading over the next couple of days. And today I want you to be thinking about point of view, right? Paul's point of view, Paul Bunyan's point of view is that this is all very normal, right? But your point of view might be like, okay, this is crazy. This would never happen. There's not going to be a baby, right, whose crib was a rowboat. You know what a rowboat looks like with the paddles or the oars sticking out? He was so big that he had to sleep in a rowboat? Probably not. Okay, and if you can tell, his bathtub is overflowing into their house. Here's his little rubber ducky going kind of out the doorway there. You can see in the bottom their chairs to their table, right? Nobody uses wheels from a wagon to button their shirts. That would be gigantic, right? So your point of view might be very different than Paul's. You might be thinking, this is crazy. This would never happen. No way, right? So as you're reading, you can understand and distinguish your point of view, which is probably very different from the author's point of view today. All right, we're going to continue with this story this week, and we're going to have some things to do. So pay attention, right? Look in Google Classroom for what your assignments are this week. Have a great day.